Imagine a queen, draped in gold, dripping in jewels, adored by her people. The very picture of elegance. Now imagine that queen stepping into a grand ballroom, wearing a gown unlike anything the world had ever seen. Its color, a deep, unnatural brown. Its texture, silky but unsettling, because it wasn't made from silk at all. It was made from human hair. Thousands of strands carefully woven together, taken from the heads of women across the kingdom. Some of them gave it willingly, some did not. This was not just fashion. This was a statement, a political weapon, and a scandal that would haunt her for the rest of her life. This is the macabre story of vanity, politics, and a dress that horrified a kingdom. The year was 1578. And Europe was a stage for spectacle. Royalty competed not just in power, but in appearance. A queen's clothing was a weapon of influence, a way to project wealth, dominance, and even divine authority. For this Queen Isabella of Castilian beauty was more than vanity. It was survival. Born into a family that clawed its way to the throne through blood and intrigue, Isabella grew up watching her mother win battles without lifting a sword, simply by dazzling courtiers with gowns that bankrupted rivals. As a child, she learned a brutal truth. In a court where men fought with armies, women fought with appearance. By the time Isabella became queen, she had mastered the art of visual warfare. Her dresses were not just outfits, they were propaganda. But her appetite for the rare and unusual went far beyond silk from China or lace from Flanders. She was fascinated by the strange, the forbidden, the things that made people whisper, and hair was her favorite. Human hair had always been a currency in fashion. Wigs, hairpieces, and ornaments were symbols of status, and the best hair came from young, healthy women. In markets from Paris to Venice, dealers quietly bought hair from the poor, who would trade a lifetime of locks for a few coins. But Isabella didn't just want hair for wigs. She wanted something that had never been done before. Her inspiration came during a visit to an abbey in the countryside. Among the relics and treasures, she saw a tapestry woven not from wool or silk, but from strands of hair collected from the nuns who had taken their final vows. Each lock represented a life of devotion, a piece of someone's very identity. Isabella was captivated. She didn't see it as piety. She saw it as power. If a humble convent could weave a wall hanging from human hair, then surely a queen could wear an entire dress made from it. Her advisors tried to dissuade her. It was morbid, they said, unholy. But Isabella didn't care. To her, nothing showed dominion like wearing what other people considered untouchable. It would be the ultimate symbol, a queen literally clothed in the essence of her subjects. Within weeks, she summoned her tailors and weavers, giving them a task that would soon become the most infamous commission in the history of her court. The project began in secrecy, shrouded in misleading paperwork and whispered instructions. Officially, it was called the Silk Commission, a name chosen to deflect suspicion, but there was no silk involved at all. Isabella's most trusted agents were dispatched across the kingdom, with orders that were as simple as they were unsettling. Acquire hair, any color, any length, as long as it was strong, lustrous, and healthy. They scoured the countryside. In sleepy farming villages, silver coins were offered to peasant women for their braids, sometimes willingly, sometimes under the pressure of a soldier's stare. In city markets, merchants were paid to collect clippings from barbers and wig makers. And according to the darker rumors, hair was taken from the prison cells and execution grounds, shorn from the condemned moments before the noose tightened, or cut from the heads of plague victims before the burial shroud was drawn. The raw material arrived in great burlap sacks, carted into the palace under cover of night. The weavers, chosen for their skill, sworn to silence, treated the hair as they would the finest silk. It was boiled in great copper vats to cleanse it, the steam filling the workshops with an acrid, almost metallic scent. Once softened, it was sorted by shade, combed and spun into threads so fine it seemed to float in the air. But hair is not a docile fiber. It resists the loom, tangling like ivy, snapping under tension as if rebelling against its transformation. The work was punishing long hours bent over the loom until the fingers bled. Several tailors quit in disgust, unable to stomach the nature of the task. Others stayed, seduced by Isabella's promise of gold heavy enough to buy land, titles, or escape from the very kingdom whose queen they served. Nearly a year passed before the dress emerged in its full, unsettling glory. It was unlike anything the court had ever seen, a fitted bodice molded perfectly to Isabella's figure, its fibers catching the light like strands of midnight spun with molten gold. The skirt swept outward in a cascade that shimmered like liquid shadow, pooling on the marble floor like a living thing. Up close, the garment revealed its secrets. 1,000 shades woven together, chestnut, melting into raven black, ash blonde threaded with streaks of copper, and here and there a glint of silver hair from the elderly. It was beautiful, but beautiful in the way of a predator's gaze. The unveiling was planned with meticulous calculation. The spring ball of 1,580 would be the stage, the palace ballroom, a vast hall of mirrors and gilded columns, flooded with candlelight that danced across every surface. The air was heavy with perfume and music, the chatter of courtiers buzzing like a hive. When the great doors opened and Isabella stepped inside, the effect was instantaneous. The music faltered. A gasp rolled through the room like a ripple across still water, every eye fixed upon her. From a distance, the dress flowed like liquid silk, each movement casting strange shadows that clung to her as if alive. But as she drew closer, the truth began to dawn, whispered from mouth to mouth with a mix of awe and revulsion. Is it true? Is that human hair? The symbolism was as sharp as a blade. Here stood a queen literally wrapped in the bodies of her people. To her loyalists, it was a vision of unity, the realm itself woven into her skin, each strand a life bound to the crown. But to her detractors, it was a declaration of arrogance so vast it bordered on blasphemy. Isabella thrived on that tension. She smiled as she danced, her gown swaying like a living shadow, daring anyone to speak their disapproval aloud. Foreign ambassadors studied her with fascination, their scribes already imagining the scandal such a vision would cause in their own courts. The legend of the Hair Queen began to spread that very night, traveling faster than ships could sail. Yet not all tales carried flattery. In the weeks that followed, crude pamphlets appeared in the marketplaces, woodcut images of Isabella as a witch, her loom fed by the severed heads of the dead. Priests thundered from the pulpit, condemning the dress as a sin against God, an affront to the natural order. They warned that such vanity could only draw the wrath of heaven. And yet, in the glittering salons of the nobility, there was an undeniable fascination. Noble women began commissioning small adornments of their own, a fan handle wrapped in braided hair, a belt woven with a lover's locks, gloves stitched with a hidden lining of human strands. They whispered that it was dangerous, that it was forbidden, but wore them all the same, intoxicated by the shock it caused. For Isabella, the moment was intoxicating, a perfect storm of scandal and envy, of power made visible in every flicker of candlelight against her gown. She believed she had bent the court to her will, that the whispers, no matter how vicious, only tightened her grip on the throne. But such triumphs are fragile things. In the shadows of the palace corridors, resentment was fermenting. The murmurs of scandal were beginning to harden into something sharper, something that would not fade with the season's fashions. And when the first signs of famine crept into the kingdom, the dress would no longer be seen as a marvel. It would become a weapon, one that would turn against the queen herself. In 1581, disaster struck. A bitter winter had frozen the farmlands, followed by a summer so dry that rivers shrank into cracked beds of dust. The harvest failed, and famine spread like a plague across the kingdom. Markets that once overflowed with bread, cheese, and fruit now stood empty. Desperate mothers boiled roots and weeds to feed their children, and the air of the capital was heavy with the scent of hunger and decay. It was in this grim atmosphere that the image of Queen Isabella, the woman who had once dazzled her people, transformed from a symbol of beauty into a lightning rod for rage. The memory of her grand entrance in the hairdress resurfaced like an open wound. What had once been admired as a marvel now seemed obscene. To the starving, that gown was no longer art. It was theft. It was the queen parading herself in the very bodies of her people while their bones showed through their skin. Her political enemies, always waiting for a chance to strike, pounced. Whispers spread through taverns and church steps that the hair had not been bought, but taken by force. That it came from prisoners, plague victims, even from women who had died on the gallows. The most chilling rumor claimed the dress was cursed, that each strand carried the spirit of the one it had belonged to, binding them forever in servitude to the queen. These stories spread faster than the famine itself, carried in angry sermons from the pulpits and scribbled onto crude pamphlets pinned to market walls. The people began to murmur that the famine was divine punishment, that God was striking the land for Isabella's blasphemy. At first, Isabella tried to fight back, appearing in public in fine silks and gold-threaded gowns, smiling as though nothing were wrong. But each appearance seemed to harden public hatred. When she wore the hairdress for the second time after the famine began, the reaction was explosive. Stones were thrown at her carriage. A priest publicly refused to bless her, claiming she carried the mark of the damned. Humiliated, she withdrew from public life. The hairdress was locked away in the deepest chamber of the palace, but it did nothing to lift the curse of rumor. Her influence in court waned. Her allies abandoned her, and the men who once bowed to her now spoke of her with mocking pity. Within 3 years, she was forced into exile. The official story claimed she was retiring for her health, but the truth was far crueler. She was being pushed out, her presence considered a liability to the stability of the crown. She left the capital under a gray dawn, her carriage escorted by a handful of loyal guards, the palace gates closing behind her like the end of a chapter. She spent her final years in a coastal villa, far from the grand halls where she had once ruled. Letters from the capital were rare, and most carried news she did not wish to hear. Some nights, the villagers claimed they saw her standing by the shore, staring at the black waves, her hair loose and wild in the wind as if she were waiting for something or someone. The fate of the hairdress remains one of history's unanswered questions. Some chronicles claim that, after her exile, the church seized it and burned it in a midnight ritual to release the trapped souls. Others say it was quietly dismantled, the hair sorted, and sent back to the families it had come from, though few believed this mercy was ever granted. And then there are the more tantalizing whispers, that the gown was hidden deep in the royal vault, sealed away under lock and key, its fabric still intact, the hair still smooth as if untouched by time. When Isabella died in 1593, she was buried without fanfare, her body placed in a modest stone tomb overlooking the sea. No crown, no jewels, just a faded gown of plain cloth. Yet her name lived on, tied forever to that single, scandalous creation. In courtly gossip, in old songs, and the cautionary tales told to young noblewomen, she was remembered not as a ruler, but as the queen who dared to weave vanity, power, and death into one unforgettable garment. For centuries, her story has stood as a warning that the symbols of power can turn to shackles, and beauty can curdle into something monstrous. And somewhere, perhaps in the dark heart of a forgotten vault, the hairdress may still wait, silent and patient, carrying with it the weight of every head it once adorned. History remembers kings for the wars they fought, and queens for the gowns they wore. But sometimes, those gowns tell a story far darker than any battlefield. If you want more forgotten tales of power, scandal, and the bizarre side of history, stay curious, because the past is stranger than you think.